Pesach in the Chayei Adam. We're in chapter 120. We won't dwell upon this because most of the stuff is not really germane anymore because we often sell chometz. But it's interesting to note some of these laws because they're pertinent to businesses that might want to operate on Pesach, or if a Jewish person and a non-Jewish person are partners in a business, and that business engages in the sale, ownership, distribution, somehow, some way is involved with products that contain chometz. So we won't dwell upon these topics too much, but we will go through them. So these rules are known as the laws of 11 products, chometz, that belong to a non-Jew, that are stored in the house of a Jewish person, and the law of a Jewish person that entrusts his chometz as a surety to a non-Jew, or he entrusts that same chometz to a Jewish person. The Torah tells us, Lo yireh lecha chametz, says you shall not see chametz at all for the week of Pesach. And the rabbis of Talmud say that lecha, the word to you, teaches us that it has to belong to you in order for you to violate the prohibition on seeing it. But the chametz that is not yours, there's no prohibition on seeing it on chametz. Since the Torah says that for 7 days you can also not have any leavened products or sourdough products found in your possession, it doesn't say lecha, it doesn't say to you in the same way as the first one does. So in that case, even if it's something that is not yours, you don't violate it if it's not, as long as it's not your property. And the rabbis learned from this, they received the tradition that you certainly cannot violate it unless the chametz belongs to you. However, what it teaches us is that if you accept responsibility for it, meaning if it becomes damaged or lost, you have to replace it. Even in the whole place in every place in the Torah we look, that something that isn't actually money is not really considered money. The laws of chametz include chametz that is not actually yours, and so it's telling you that you cannot have it anywhere with any respect to the product. So even if you simply take responsibility for the loss or destroyed chametz, you violate the prohibition on Pesach. Why? Because you have it. If you have it with you, it's still entrusted to you. In such cases, a non-Jew that entrusts his chametz to a Jewish person, if the Jewish person accepts responsibility for either theft or loss, which is to say that they make a contract where the condition is that they make an explicit condition that the Jewish person is going to pay him back, even though a regular or an intrinsic part of accepting responsibility would often include these type of damages, theft or loss. Since the chametz product, is placed into the care of the Jewish person, that's the same thing as if he said explicitly, I'm going to compensate you for these losses or thefts that occur. Unless you say, just leave it there. And that's something different, which is a separate rule on guardianship, which is discussed in Choshen Mishpat, but not here in the Chayei Adam. If a non-Jew does entrusts the item, then we say that there's no rule preventing the Jewish person from simply saying leave it there and removing any responsibility from the product, meaning that if it was just simply left there and they didn't really accept the guardianship upon themselves, a Jewish person could be exempt. So that's why we're saying in our case there has to be a contract between them. They have to somehow discuss the terms of it, and you don't need to make an actual transaction in this case. And the Torah would exempt you from this violation. Nonetheless, since there are many places that have local laws that would make you responsible for it, that would then make you obligated even if you didn't make a contract. So if you were somehow negligent to the item, or in certain places where you're contributory negligent, then you might be held liable, and so this exemption that we have just discussed wouldn't apply. So whether it's in one's own house or any place that belongs to the Jewish person, that Jewish person has to get rid of any chometz that is left in his trust from a non-Jew. Even if you left it in a special corner and you rented him the corner, it doesn't count. We should do that as a first decision. Why? Because we say that a person who rents a space doesn't make an acquisition on the property left above it, and so therefore the Jewish person will still be responsible for it. Nonetheless, we allow one to go ahead and rely on this if they did rent a space for the non-Jew to store chometz in there, because as long as you make a special place for the non-Jew and you make a special place for his stuff, that is like accepting responsibility for chometz of a non-Jew in the home of a non-Jew, which everyone would agree is okay. So in a sense, meaning if you were to watch a non-Jew's house and he has chometz in there, but it's not in the Jew's house, you therefore aren't violating the "let it not be found in my house" rule that Torah set up. This would be the same thing if the Jewish person rented a house from a non-Jew, and the non-Jew leaves his chometz there for Pesach, and he rents a spot for the chometz for the non-Jew. That would seem to be permitted, even as a good solution in general. Now, what doesn't work is if the Jewish person takes his chametz and gives it to a non-Jew who doesn't own it. Why? Because the Jewish person still owns it, and that's like having chametz found with a non-Jew, and you're obligated to get rid of it. You have to either give it to the non-Jew completely, or destroy it. Okay, but if you went and give it to the original non-Jew, then you do not have responsibility for it anymore, and you will not violate Torah law. Okay, so the main thing is that it doesn't belong to you, and it's not anywhere in your house. If you give it to a second non-Jew and he accepts responsibility for it, we're not sure. That's the first halacha. Second halacha. Some say that even if the Jewish person does not accept responsibility for theft and loss, only meaning that he's like an unpaid watchman. So in those cases, since there is a possibility of a situation that could arise where if a person was negligent and they would be held responsible, then the Torah would say that that's the Jew's chometz, and you'd have to destroy it because it's being found in your possession. And some people say that even if you don't accept any responsibility whatsoever, even that of an unpaid watchman, what happens is the non-Jew shows up, right? So then he's very strong. Such as maybe back in the day, an army showed up and they tell you to keep the chometz, and if you lose it, they're going to force you to pay him back. So some people say that doesn't count. Okay, some people say that doesn't count. So where you're forced against your will. And if you were required by local law and custom, then you for sure have to get rid of it. And for sure, if you are watching it and you're an unpaid watchman, you definitely have to get it. If you accept it and forgot about it, then you can rely on the first opinion that it's not really yours, and that we said you weren't accepting responsibility for theft and loss, so you could give that chometz back to the non-Jew, and that wouldn't have been considered violating the laws of Pesach by having this chometz in your possession on Pesach. For sure, you definitely can't accept chometz on Pesach. This rule is only if you do it beforehand. Well, 3. If you're not accepting responsibility for this product, then you are not required to destroy it. Nonetheless, you have to put a mechitza in front of it, a very large wall that is at least 10 tefachim high, which is about 35 to 40 inches, in order that you shouldn't come by accident to come and eat some of it. Because people just don't stay away from chometz all year long, and so you might go in there like, oh, I'll just eat a little bit, I'll have a little bit of the crackers. But a person is not allowed to cover it with a tarp or another utensil, because it's just going to lie there and it's going to stay there for a number of days. It might be easy to access. So therefore, one has to make a more solid one. So too, you also can't just simply hang a tarp in front of it because you could simply move through it very easily. Another rule involving the non-Jew that leaves his chometz in a Jew's house without his permission, if it's Yom Tov, on that day you can just cover it with a utensil because you're not allowed to build a wall on Yom Tov. And Chol Moed, okay, you could go ahead and build it. Or if the non-Jew came in Chol Moed and so too before Pesach, you in those cases have to build the wall of a 10 tafach, 35 to 40 inch wall in front of it. Okay, and you can only cover it with the utensil, like we said, like cover it with a bucket when it's on Yom Tov. Okay, or if it's just for temporarily, so you can build a wall in Chol Moed. And if you're allowed to throw it out somehow, or you can destroy it in a way you don't have to pay the non-Jew back, then you still have to make a mechitza on Chol Moed. However, you could, if you're going to be obligated to have to pay back, and it would be less expensive to build the wall, you may build the wall. Halacha 4. This rule only applies when the non-Jew leaves it in a Jew's house and walks away, because then the concern is the Jew might go ahead and eat it, and that's why you have to go ahead and cover it. But if a non-Jew comes into a Jew's house and he's holding chometz, you don't have to kick the non-Jew out, and you don't have to put a utensil on him or on anything else, because the non-Jew is going to keep the Jew away from the chometz, and the Jew doesn't have the chometz of the non-Jew under his control at all. However, a Jewish person cannot eat at the same table as a non-Jew who is enjoying chometz, even if you go ahead and put a little bit of some type of division on the table with you. Even though that works during the rest of the year when you're separating between meat and milk, chometz is any small amount, whereas milk and meat is a much larger amount. And if you get even the smallest crumb in your food, it's no good. And that doesn't matter how big the table is, if you have a gigantic table, because the rabbis never made any distinction. However, if the Jew doesn't eat at the same table with the non-Jew, they're just eating in the same facility, then the non-Jew can go ahead and eat, and then you can wash it down, and then the Jewish person can eat on that table afterwards. Halacha 5. A Jewish person that gives his chometz to a non-Jew, a Jewish person that gives his chometz to a Jew, who is his friend, okay? Or he gives it to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew, even if the non-Jew accepts responsibility for it, of loss and theft, nonetheless, this still is considered your chometz, and you are going to violate the laws of Pesach. You're going to violate the prohibition to keep chometz on Pesach. And if you give it to a Jewish person, even if he accepted loss for it, he's also going to violate it. So this is a stringency, okay? Because both the person doing the entrusting and the person with whom the chometz is entrusted are violating it. But the idea that the chometz completely leaves the responsibility of the original owner to the trustee, that is only to be some leniency. But on the flip side, we don't find anywhere in the Torah that the person would violate or would accept responsibility if it was not in his possession. We say that the trusted product, in this case chometz, is going to be in the trustee's house, and he's going to violate Pesach by keeping it there and accepting achrayos, or accepting responsibility for it. So a Jewish person that has chometz in his possession that belongs to another Jew and is entrusted to him to watch it, you wait until the 5th hour, and if the owners don't come, you sell it to a non-Jew in a way that it could be purchased or repurchased after Pesach. And he explains that we will explain this later on, how to do that type of sale later on in 123. However, it's prohibited to sell it permanently unless you're unable to sell it in any other fashion, because they're just trying to save yourself from the violation of the laws of Pesach. Then you can sell it to the non-Jew permanently, and you would just have responsibility to pay the Jewish person back after Pesach. And if the trustee knows that if he waits till the 5th hour he won't be able to sell it, then he should sell it earlier. The whole point is just try not to violate the laws of Pesach. And if you don't sell it, then in the 5th hour immediately you have to light it on fire. Okay, and that's the rule. And that's even if you are not required to compensate the original owner for loss and theft. And that way you don't violate Torah law. And Torah law is more important than the Torah law of Pesach is more important than the Torah law of not destroying other people's property. Okay, nonetheless, a person who is entrusting these items should not rely on getting paid back for it afterwards, and he has to actually take responsibility for the sale instead of the trustee. Because if the trustee is going to wait for him, he's not required to rely on that fact, because maybe the person entrusting it, the original owner, is not going to do his job, and so then the responsibility is going to fall on the trustee, and he'll be obligated to pay it back because he's going to be considered negligent, and by not selling it. So therefore, he should sell it. And some people disagree with this argument, and some people say you're supposed to destroy it. But if you do neither of those things, if you neither burn it nor sell it, and you let it sit through Pesach, you can just simply say to the original owner, "Here is your chometz." Okay, and if you have nothing left because it's stolen or lost during Pesach, or it becomes this prohibited item, then you cannot say, "Here's your chometz." So, but try to not violate the laws of Pesach, please. A Jewish person that entrusts his chometz to his friend, a Jew, and is entrusted him under the laws of a loan. So I am lending you chometz, and you'll do whatever you want to do with it. Just sell it, or you can light it on fire yourself. So the Jewish person who borrows it is violating the laws of Pesach. Okay, because when you hand one thing to another Jew, that transaction is considered transactional, like one would transact any other secured item. So the truth is that the money, the value, is secured to the chometz in this case. And so having it means you basically own the chometz. And if you let it go through Pesach and don't destroy it, you may not be able to say, "Here's your chometz," and you'd have to pay him back a sum of money. Some people say that since you went ahead and intentionally left it over Pesach and didn't sell it, you therefore have to pay separately from the actual chometz. And you might argue that the person who accepts a loan on property like this, just when it's chometz, then they become a shomer, they become a guardian of it. And a guardian can always say, "Here's your stuff," even if it's some type of non-tangible prohibition lands upon it. And so some people would say that was applied to the chometz as well. So even though you violated the laws of Pesach, nonetheless, you have fulfilled your duties as a guardian. So you could say, "Here's your chometz. Here's your chometz that's now prohibited. You can't do anything with." In every place where we say that a Jewish person has to destroy it, even if the chometz belongs to a non-Jew, and he doesn't destroy it, and a non-Jew wants to come and take the chometz back, you can give it to him, because it's after Pesach. So it's only a prohibition delivered to the Jewish person themselves, and it's only delivered as a penalty in order to not leave your chometz over Pesach. But such a penalty was not extended to non-Jews, even in the case where you simply accepted responsibility for the item and don't actually own it. Nonetheless, you're not allowed to do that, because he might turn and sell this chometz to a non-Jew. However, some say that you can still go ahead and do it because you have a responsibility to guard the items, and you guarded them, and the concern that he might go and sell them to a Jew is not considered enough of a concern. Okay, let's see over here. Moving right along. Now, a non-Jew who extends a loan to a Jewish person and extends credit over products that are chometz, and that credit that credit's extended on this product is in the property of a non-Jew, or you left it in a Jew's possession, but you give the spot to the non sorry you give the chometz to the non-Jew with a the whole transaction of ownership should you not pay back. Okay, and you do that transaction by transacting it along a piece of property, and we're going to learn about that later on when we talk about selling chometz. And then you tell him, if I don't pay you back until such and such a time, then the product shall be yours from now moving forward. That time eventually comes and you don't get paid back, you then are allowed to retrieve it because it's now yours. Even if the time doesn't come for paying back the full amount until after Pesach, since you made the stipulation that it will be starting from now before Pesach, what we see is that when the time comes after Pesach and you haven't been compensated for your chometz, the chometz going all the way back to that point really did belong to the non-Jew, and it did belong to the non-Jew. And this only works with under the following three conditions. Condition number one, that you have to say the transaction starts now. Number two, you have to have it in the possession of the non-Jew. And number three, he has to have not paid you by the time the contract expires. If you're missing any one of these three conditions, then what you have is the chometz of a Jew that has basically traversed Pesach, and it's all prohibited to every Jew forever and all eternity. Because if you don't do that, even if you went ahead and put it into the property of a non-Jew, nonetheless, since the entire length of Pesach, the chometz belonged to a Jew, we say that anybody who doesn't collect on a loan until the time of payback arrives is basically keeping the product in their own possession. And since the time of completion of the prohibition of Pesach completes itself immediately after Pesach, therefore what we have is a situation of the chometz of a Jew in the possession of a non-Jew, and you violate that because it's still yours. And even if the time comes before Pesach and he doesn't pay you for the chometz, since you didn't say the transaction starts from now, and we say that the law is that such a transaction is considered only temporary, meaning it's a conditional sale. You don't really believe it's going to go through. You just are relying on them. And we say that relying on somebody to do something is not considered a full transaction. Some people say, furthermore, that this rule doesn't apply to when you're selling to a non-Jew. You could make such a condition to a non-Jew. Many later authorities disagree with this, and therefore we follow the rule. You have to make the condition to say you get it from right now, before Pesach. Okay, but it's just not in the possession of the non-Jew until that spot is basically leased to the non-Jew to take control of it. Okay, and that's even furthermore, even if the chometz belongs to a non-Jew and it's in the possession of a Jew, since you're telling him it's starting from right now, then at that case, it's going to be the chometz of a non-Jew in possession of a Jew. And the responsibility of that chometz will then go to the Jew, because you would be, if you were to lose it, then you would have to pay him back for the loss. That's why you have to say from right now, because if you're simply entrusted with it, you are taking responsibility for any losses. Okay, and the reason why it would be better is because when you both sell the chometz to the non-Jew and make the spot on which it belongs also a non-Jew. That's like watching the chometz of a non-Jew in the space of a non-Jew, which we have already determined to be permitted, because you meet neither the criteria for seeing your own chometz nor having your chometz found in your possession. Okay, which would not work if the chometz was in the possession of a Jewish person. Furthermore, if you were to make the sale right now, and you leave your chometz in the possession of the non-Jew, if he pays you back before Pesach, nonetheless, if you don't do the proper pattern of transaction, and you also don't transfer the chometz, so then you're going to have your chometz is still considered yours, belonging to the rented space that belongs to a non-Jew. So that the way to properly do that is to make sure that it's the non-Jew by giving him by giving him ownership of the chometz now, and renting him space. So that becomes the chometz of a non-Jew in the space of a non-Jew that a Jewish person is kind of observing. Nonetheless, it's preferable to not do it this way, to do it this way and not use a loan, because since in a case of a loan, they could give you that on Pesach. You could give it to them on Pesach, so you might actually still contain ownership for it over Pesach. So even if you went and handed your chometz to them and say, pay me back afterwards, and we're saying that that's not an effective way to do it, because it can still be considered somewhat your possession. Okay, and so therefore, all of these things should be done and taken care of before Pesach. And so too, if a Jewish person extends a loan to a non-Jew on the non-Jew's chometz, and that chometz is in the Jew's house, and they make the condition that the transaction starts from right now, and then the time for paying back arrives, which is after Pesach, and you're not paid back, even though you didn't accept responsibility for this chometz, the Jewish person has violated the prohibition, because since the time came and you didn't get paid back, it's basically going all the way back to the start. It's going to be yours. That's why that's a bad idea. So nonetheless, a Jewish person is not obligated to destroy it, because while it's over Pesach, it's never actually reached the time for the payment to arrive. And maybe the non-Jew will come and get it, and then the Jew won't violate it. However, we don't like to wait for these frivolous possibilities. But if you don't say the transaction starts now, and you take no responsibility for it, because then that would be like having a non-Jew just dropping off chometz in the Jew's house, which is not a violation according to the Torah. Okay, we have one last halacha here, number 9. If a Jewish person goes and sells chometz after the time period has passed for Erev Pesach, and even if he sells chometz on Pesach itself, some people say that the money is permitted, even to the owner of the chometz, because the chometz does not actually seize the value of the money and prohibit it, as would happen by other prohibitions. And others say that it's only if the non-Jewish people in the house, they transact on the prohibited chometz, but they did it without the knowledge of the Jewish person. But if a Jewish person does it on their behalf to a non-Jew, or the non-Jew sells it with the knowledge of the Jew, the money is prohibited, because of this prohibition attaches a penalty to it. Thank you very much for joining us for Siman 120. We will learn more about proper sales of chometz on Pesach at another time. We will pick up next with the laws of chometz and what's considered chometz, what's considered a mixture of chometz, all these things, and what happens with them before Pesach. It'll be very interesting. Take care.